Welcome back to the PS Pub. I probably, like many of you, have also grown up on some iteration of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. At this point, they are virtually a staple, a rite of passage of sorts for any kid growing up. Each generation has their own turtles they know and love, each having things about them that people like and dislike, of course. I am a 90s kid who to this day still loves tokusatsu stuff, so the 90s movies and Turtles in Time are my particular turtles, but again, I think there's something special about each iteration that stands out for their given generation. In the 2000s, we had the animated reboot and the movie that spawned the tie-in product of today's video, TMNT. It was a 3D animated film that sort of acted as a sequel to the live-action films, but also held up as a standalone. I remember watching the film and thinking that it was okay. The animation was solid, the story was decent, satisfying both new fans and fans of the 90s turtle film continuity for the most part. Overall, for me, it was like a solid 6 or 7 out of 10. In truth, my appreciation for the Ninja Turtles franchise wasn't the reason for checking this one out. Sure, I have read a lot of the Ninja Turtles comics and have grown to really enjoy a lot of the different aspects of the franchise in almost all aspects of media, but no. My curiosity stemmed way back when I was doing research for the worst rated PSP games. Alongside alumni like Napoleon Dynamite sat TMNT for the PSP. I never played any of the video game tie-ins for this one via any sort of releases, so out of morbid curiosity, here we are today. The only question though, is it deserving of the moniker as one of the worst games on the PSP? Quite literally at the time of writing, it's only 4 from the bottom of worst games on most lists that I found for worst PSP games. Generally though, it's always pretty close to the bottom. Well, today we are going to find out. In honor of the 90s turtle movies, we are going to prepare now by ordering ourselves a nice pie from Domino's.
Wise man say forgiveness is divine, but never pay full price for late pizza.
But just to be on the safe side, I do have my Mickeys on standby. This is TMNT, the video game. The story in TMNT is basically the same plot as the film, so if you're looking to avoid spoilers, here's your warning, but I won't be going over it beat for beat. Still, the game opens up almost exactly as the film does, with Leonardo returning home after going on a trip of self-discovery and training. We are immediately thrust into the first of 15 different levels in the game. I won't say first impressions aren't necessarily bad here, because the game does fit the bill and looks like the movie, but I can't quite figure out why. I get a Gex feeling when I look at Leo here, or rather a discount Gex feeling when I look at the character models.
This place is weirder than 4th of July at Rick James' place.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, and these models aren't the worst I've seen, and probably the highest praise I can give the game is that it does look and feel like the film it's based upon. Then the game starts, and you quickly realize why this game has low ratings. In a strange way, the game almost feels like a rhythm game that will occasionally require you to do combat, at least in the early stages, and the combat is... well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. On the game's Wikipedia page, there is a quote from the game director stating that the TMNT movie is all about the emotions associated with the family and teenage angst. We've taken that philosophy and turned it into gameplay mechanics that will be fun and challenging. I guess this kind of makes sense overall since the turtles are very expressive here in the animations when jumping from rooftop to rooftop. However, I do believe this comment is more directed at the console games, as this philosophy kind of begins and ends here, as outside of this and technically 2 more mechanics in the game, the turtles don't really interact with one another, let alone in any sort of angsty way, aside from the obvious plot points from the movie. Still, I can appreciate that there was at least a direction the team at Ubisoft had for the game, regardless of its final quality. Still, one of the nice things some 20 years later about looking back at older games like this is being able to look at reviews for the time to see what mainstream reviewers of the time thought about the game and its potential strengths and weaknesses. In the case of TMNT, I do have to laugh at a lot of these old game reviews, and it's something that I've noticed even today, in that a lot of video game journalists I feel don't really play a lot of these games extensively. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't always play something 100% to its completion, but I always try to play enough to get a good feel for the product overall before really passing any sort of judgment on it. Here, however, the biggest negative points are that these games are quote-unquote strictly for kids, which doesn't make sense as a criticism for me, and the other major criticism for the Wii version of the game is that it didn't contain enough enough Wii functionality, ergo it would receive a low score. So because they didn't utilize the motion controls that much, it automatically received a bad score. Still, my point is that the modern trend of reviewers not really playing or understanding a lot of these games isn't a new phenomena, as even back in the mid-2000s we had similar reviews. In this case, it may have actually been better for this game, as I have a feeling most of these reviewers never even made it to a boss fight in this game. And it completely shows, as this game was the perfect fodder for a lot of these journos back in the mid-2000s. Yet this particular game was never really brought up back then. TMNT's core gameplay is like a rhythm game that doesn't feature a soundtrack that you bounce around to, which when you really stop and think about it is pretty weird. Rather, the game is predicated on seeing how fast you can get through a level or section within a level, with as few mistakes as possible when sticking to the quote-unquote flow of your movements. You'll notice this chain icon during the game and at the end of levels. This denotes your chain for your parkour movements. The more times you can successfully move from place to place, be it normal movements or holding down the button to do a charged move when indicated by the splash effects, which means you're either going to do a charge jump, slide down a wall, or swing on a rope. The charged move is similar in a rhythm game when you need to hold the note down for a long period of time and letting it go at a specific moment. Completing these combo chains for movement overall, the higher your points are. This ties into the different medals you get in-game at the results screen for each level, alongside stuff like collecting all TMNT letters, completion time, and turtle tag, which I'll talk about in a bit. Control-wise, you have the ability to move your turtle around the area when not performing the parkour gameplay by utilizing the analog stick. You also have the ability to interact with breakable objects in order to find hidden TMNT letters and slices of pizza, the latter of which is used to help heal you up. These sections are mostly pointless if I'm honest, save for needing to find hidden letters because you can pick up pizza slices and letters while performing the parkour moments, which these moments where you're able to freely move around, they're generally confined to really small sections. And because hidden TMNT letters can be stuffed away in these different boxes and crates, that means that you will have to stop and sort through these boxes even if you're just trying to get through the level quickly. Now, there are technically different routes you can take in a level here, as you can switch between a few options when traversing a stage. Ultimately though, the levels always end the same way, so there really isn't a reason to check out the other routes except for completionist purposes, which in hindsight does kind of suck because this means you're likely not going to collect all the TMNT letters on a first playthrough, since you won't know which of these minor deviations will have the correct letters down them. This just compounding on with the fact that you are going to have to sift through a lot of these boxes, like I mentioned earlier, to find some of these odd letters here and there. So when you're playing a stage, in order to engage with the parkour mechanics, you'll see a pulsing blue light somewhere on screen. At this point, you have to guess which of the 4 face buttons you'll need to press in order to leap to that location. The game doesn't tell you which one will be the correct one, and a lot of the times if you guess wrong, the turtle will just kind of sit there till you spam the correct button. If the indicator is to the turtle's right, you'll press circle. Forward, you'll press triangle. Left, square. And in times where the indicator is pulsing orange, you'll hold the X button down till the pulsing indicator turns blue. The game favors multiple playthroughs on levels, as you'll more likely than not need to replay a stage in order to flawlessly run through the level, once you have memorize the stage, of course. In a way, it's like the gameplay wanted to be a rhythm game but chickened out halfway, as aside from losing your chain combo, there isn't a lot of downside to spamming buttons till the game acknowledges the correct press, unless you really want to get the full chain for the game's extras, which, if I'm honest, aren't really worth it in my opinion, but we'll get to that eventually. Very rarely the game will throw some waiting obstacle at you, where you'll need to jump to a section and wait for a piece of construction to come by in order to jump onto it. These moments are extremely rare though, and I can only remember it happening once in my playthrough, albeit it's entirely possible it occurred more often, but I just forgot. There's also another mechanic in the parkour system titled the turtle tag mechanic. Basically, a timer will pop up in the game where you'll need to quickly move to where your turtle compatriot is at before the the time runs out. If you do so, they'll grab a hold of you and throw you a little bit further ahead into the level, allowing you to bypass certain sections of the level. This helps you complete the level a little bit faster, and it doesn't take anything away from your chain commands or anything like that. It's like the game itself is saying, I know, let me help you get through this just a little bit quicker. But in fairness, it's not a bad mechanic, and it does kind of make sense as it adds to the whole idea of the turtles being there to help one another and that whole family dynamic situation that the creator had mentioned when it came to the teen angst and family aspect. These turtle tags are also tallied up at the end of each level, so again, if you are going for a completionist run, you will need to collect all these little turtle tag moments in the actual game itself for all the levels where they are available. At first, I admit impressions weren't so great, and I didn't like the fact movement was specifically tied to the face buttons. I've stated before I'm not the biggest fan when it comes to rhythm-based games in general, so my initial reaction was to absolutely hate this. Even more so when I realized spamming all the buttons worked just as well to get through most of the sections of a level. And even then, when I would come to a section that would require me to think a bit more, I could easily course correct and regain any health I lost along the way. Still, after playing the game, I needed to sleep on it, and the more I sat with it, I kind of started to like the idea of TMNT's main gameplay. Now, I don't know if it was just that I was getting used to the roughness / badness of the game or what, but I don't know, I kind of had a bit of fun moving through the levels fast, jumping from spot to spot, at least towards the end of the game in the last handful of levels. Once you kind of know what you're doing, it does become easier to predict what's coming and sometimes guess which directional button needs pressing. I started to actively engage with how the game is supposed to play rather than just haphazardly spamming buttons. In a way, at least with the core gameplay, the more I sat with it, I did start to kinda enjoy what I was playing. There absolutely was something to this core parkour mechanic. I just wish there would have been more downside, I guess, to incentivize the player to actively engage with the mechanic rather than just spamming buttons till completion. Now, that being said, I still don't think this was the right way to go about making this game, and personally, I would preferred something different. Plus, there are quite a few issues with this gameplay style that do cross over from just being an issue of taste and minor nitpicks. I found that at times the game will still count me missing the timing of a parkour jump, but I felt I got it spot on. It happened enough times where I would take notice to it rather than it being just an anecdotal feeling towards the game. This happened especially in charged shot movement areas where I needed to hold down the X button. I could have sworn I got the timing right, but the game decided otherwise in multiple instances. Not to mention there are points where there just aren't any spots indicated on screen, like here in the level where you play as the Night Watcher. You just have to know you need to press the circle button here. This isn't the only time also, as there are multiple levels where you'll realize it's less about where the camera is facing and more about the direction your turtle is facing. So be prepared to break your chain based off this, since there are multiple times where the game will create a quote-unquote cinematic camera angle and throw off your rhythm entirely. Still, when it worked, it was satisfying to a point. To successfully land a chain and see the parkour skills of the turtles. If the main game was this, just with increasing the stakes and complexity from level to level, honestly, I think I would have had a lot more nice things to say about the game. As with some polish, this could be a pretty cool idea for a rhythm-based game. No, where the game really slams itself into a wall headfirst is when we get to the tacked-on combat of the game. We're gifted the pleasure of experiencing this combat as soon as we reach level 2, to which Mikey's a party clown, and luckily he's not alone, as I too felt like a clown after thinking this game had a bit of redeemability to it. Like I said, the story follows the movie, so if you've seen the movie, you know the plot, for the most part. It's just told exponentially worse than in the movie. Leo comes back from his hiatus in South America, causing a rift with the turtles, leading to a confrontation between Leo and the Night Watcher. I say all this to set the stage to show where the combat ultimately fails before we get into the nitty-gritty of its mechanics, because just look at this gameplay. Ghost Rider the Night Watcher is not. Like, what the hell is this actually? I know watching this is way different than playing it, but trust me, it's way worse, and I'm not even being hyperbolic with that. I do try to approach most games with a fresh mind and open perspective, but from a combat standpoint, TMNT fails in almost every aspect. Just look at the Night Watcher's gameplay more so here. This should hammer home just how bad the hit detection is in the game. When we play as the Night Watcher, you'll see he has a chain that he uses as a weapon. Now, if this were in God of War or hell, like I mentioned earlier, Ghost Rider, you'd expect the chain weapon to hit your opponent whenever you're engaging with combos. You expect to do wide area attacks and thrash about a bit. See, even as we do all this flipping and flopping around, we're still connecting attacks, and the wide net that casts is still connecting to some degree here in Ghost Rider. However, as you can see, this does not happen in TMNT. The combat is sluggish, stilted, and its hit detection is some of the most precise in a way where if you tap a button, sure, you're going to hit your opponent, but it's less you playing the game and more the game is completing a function. Now, as you progress in the game, TMNT has this pseudo quote-unquote upgrade system where after defeating a level boss, one of your first unlocks will be a charge attack. Then you'll unlock a turtle tag team attack where the game just sort of stops and a turtle jumps in to perform an attack on an enemy or enemies to deal damage. And there's also a counter/follow-up QTE style attack which has the worst animation I've ever seen in one of these. Just look at it. The first time I saw this in game, I legitimately busted out laughing as it looks completely ridiculous. Zero effort went into how this was going to look on screen. Now, technically there are, and I'm quite literally using air quotes here, combos in the game by pressing the square and triangle buttons, but it's all surface level stuff here. Any sort of depth in gameplay was relegated to the parkour system, which boils down to a pseudo rhythm game with slightly branching paths. What I mean by that is there is almost zero depth in terms of combat here. TMNT gives the illusion of quote-unquote things happening on screen, but there's never true depth to what you're doing. For example, when in combat, your character will occasionally land a critical hit. There is no indicator how this works, nor that I'm aware of is a tutorial that says this is even possible, which to be fair, I may have missed it while playing, and that there was an explanation of it being a thing. Again, I probably just forgot it along the way. My point is that it's mostly irrelevant, but it gives the illusion that stuff's happening despite being a negligible thing at best. Funny enough, Ubisoft nowadays could be considered having similar attributes in a lot of their modern games. The illusion of depth without real substance, again, I say could, as I'm sure there can always be some sort of argument that a lot of the Ubisoft games have added quote-unquote value because of all the tedium and just random things popping up on screen. However, I do find it kind of crazy that this was a thing way back in the 2000s, and despite this game receiving poor reviews, it almost feels like Ubisoft would look at this and other games like it with the quote-unquote let's give the illusion of value mindset instead of using their resources to craft a better product. And instead of using their resources to craft a better product, they would utilize those resources to hide the slop and low effort while giving the illusion of true progress. The more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess. Circling back to the game though, what makes all of this horrible and even worse is the fact that the tacked on combat happens so often in the later portions of the game that it completely stops any momentum or fun you were having with the parkour system up to that point. You know how in most games where they slowly ramp up difficulty or combat? Well, TMNT does the same here with the game beginning with zero combat, and then at the end you're gonna hit a wall every couple of jumps, that being the combat. Then you're gonna have to slog your way through this just as you casually look into the air and tap the X button, waiting for it to be over. It gets worse still, as when you run into enemies, you'll soon realize you're thrown into these gauntlet style fights where after you've defeated a handful of enemies, more will pop up. All the while you're sitting there wondering why on God's green earth, if they were going to do this, they didn't take more time and care to make the battle system actually fun at all to engage with. I said it earlier, and I know it looks bad on the footage, but truly, it's really one of those you need to try out for yourself because it's that bad, and I'm honestly surprised it doesn't get brought up more so as some of the worst beat 'em up mechanics ever. Like, I've heard people trash the bouncer, but I think the fighting system in that can be pretty fun. Truly, I'm actually having trouble thinking of a beat-em-up system I dislike more than in this game. If you can think of one on any system or handheld or anything, please let me know in the comments below, because I'm struggling with finding another. Which is sad, because after getting into the parkour a bit, I started to have hopes for the game. However, the false sense of progression, lack of turtle selection, and just horrible gameplay. It's so hard to actively enjoy any aspect of this game, even the parkour sections, when you get bogged down with the fighting gameplay. Now, I'm not sure if this is a negative thing, however, I noticed that each level is tailored to a specific turtle. So if you're a fan of anyone in particular, you'll be disappointed to know that there are only a select amount of levels designated to each turtle and the Night Watcher. It follows the movie, and yeah, it would be weird for them to all of a sudden have Mikey in South America hunting what I can assume are human traffickers, but it does mean if you don't like a specific level, then you're gonna have to deal with it in order to play as your favorite turtle. Not to mention, in the final levels, when you have access to all the turtles with their special attack, you're limited to just using Leo. Maybe some sort of character select would have been cool once you beat the game, since virtually everyone plays the same in-game. Sure, some of the animations change, but the hit detection is the exact same regardless of who you're playing as. It just adds to the quote-unquote that's a good enough vibe that shines through with this one, even though I would argue it's not very good. Still, I mentioned previously that the story for the most part is a beat-by-beat retelling of the film, so if you've seen the movie, you know what's going to happen, albeit it suffers a bit similar to Hellboy and Iron Man, where they just kind of cut stuff out and you're left going, wait, what the hell is actually going on? Wait, when did that happen? Sort of stuff, if that makes sense. Not to mention, at least with something like Iron Man, which followed the main plot of the film, they tried to at least give the player something meatier to chew on, and despite the one instance of Tony getting his heart taken out, you at least got a sense of the main plot overall, and it still would flow from point A to point B, etc., 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 for the most part. Here, though, it's the bare bones in order to get the game done. Honestly, it's actually even funnier than that. Following the boss fight at level 7, Night Watcher's Anger, we learn Raph was poisoned by the boss, and I guess spoiler alert, Raph was the Night Watcher.
But that's just plain nuts! Many of you out there are thinking, right?
So this leads to us looking for Casey Jones and April O'Neil. Once there, we get the big confrontation of Leo and the Night Watcher. Just watch how abruptly everything is after the admittedly funny reveal that Raph is the Night Watcher. The game is so shocked by this that they leave this revelation up for a while. This whole cutscene is hilarious, and it exemplifies all the issues at once with the storytelling and pacing here, as they literally just chopped stuff up and shoved it in, getting the relative plot stitched together, and it's hilarious. To be fair, I know what's going on here, as I've seen the movie, and they quote-unquote kinda explain what's going on in the next level, but they honestly haven't explained more than a few lines what's actually going on in the game and what the overall main plot is. We know there are monsters, but we don't know why or anything like that that's being told through the game. So when we see Leo randomly knocked out, it comes off as hilarious. Raph seemingly forgets he's poisoned afterwards and gives chase, ultimately failing, but leading to the climax where the remaining turtles head after Leo in order to save him before confronting the final boss in this game. I get they didn't want to spoil the whole movie so that people would go out and watch it, but this is so haphazardly thrown together that I don't know how this was supposed to get anyone to go watch the movie. The story here makes the plot seem all over the place, and the villains are barely memorable, and despite talking about the combat, I haven't even mentioned the boss fights yet.
What? You have got to be kidding me!
Similar to how this game has some of the worst beat 'em up mechanics I've ever experienced in the game, these have got to be some of the worst boss fights I've ever had the pleasure of playing. Most bosses just sort of stand there, or at the most, the aggressive ones are taken down with basic combos, or variations of your standard attack and turtle team up abilities. Occasionally you'll fight a boss who can charge at you, and when that happens, if you tap the circle button, you can dodge the attack, allowing your next 3 follow-up attacks to do more damage. Just look at how little effort there is to dodge, and how the animation itself quote-unquote functions, but has so little soul in it that they may as well have not even programmed it in. I cannot stress how easy these bosses are. There is almost zero problem solving here, and any critical thinking goes right out the window. The boss fights, I think, epitomizes everything wrong with this game. You'll notice that the arena is always the same, no matter which boss you're fighting against. The controls are awful, and you really don't feel anything from taking down these bosses. The only thing I can say positive about these fights is that mercifully they're over extremely quick, especially if you get a rhythm going. The boss virtually can't do anything. And this isn't like getting your groove in Devil May Cry or Ninja Gaiden or anything like that. It's like the game just sort of gives up and lets you wail on it for a bit in the hopes you'll keep playing afterwards, which in a way does kind of sum up what you're probably going to take away from the experience as a whole. It's like being in a relationship with a partner that doesn't carry their own weight. You'll find little value overall, and by doing the bare minimum, they hope you'll want to stick around. However, after everything is said and done and you're so apathetic and tired of wasting your time, you'll throw away the alcohol and say, "This sucks." As I mentioned earlier, each level is timed, as well as has the letter TMNT for you to pick up. Turtle tags. Getting golds in every category will net you a golden splinter, which gives you access to an extra. That's a screenshot from the movie. Awesome. To be fair, if you get a gold against Aguila, the final boss, you do get an additional cutscene of Raph as the Night Watcher. Yay. Still, if you do fancy yourself wanting to play through the levels again, like I mentioned earlier, there are multiple routes to take, so if you do want to collect every letter and see everything in game, you will need to do this a couple of different times throughout your playthrough. After a while, I realized that this game reminds me a lot of those browser-based games on Nickelodeon.com and CartoonNetwork.com back in like the late 90s and 2000s, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing, mind you, as there were some great ones back in the day. However, those were free and you were paying a premium for this experience. In a way, it reminds me of Napoleon Dynamite, where that game felt like you could have just played the same games on Newgrounds for the variety of different mini games, and you wouldn't be charged a premium to experience the different games on the site. TMNT is a little different in the sense that you are getting something wholly unique, but it is reminiscent of something you would have played for free back in the day. As far as other extras, there isn't a whole lot more, as throughout the game you'll automatically get unlocks in terms of abilities whenever you beat the level. You do have access to 2 character unlocks at certain points in the game for multiplayer, which, speaking of, yes, TMNT, funny enough, does actually feature multiplayer. And as always, I roped my brother XGP into playing the multiplayer with me. Mercifully, the team developing TMNT made the parkour portion of the game its multiplayer, which I will admit is actually quite a bit of fun once you and your friend know what you're doing and have played through the 4 maps available a few times. Since you know what's coming, it can get a bit competitive, and again, it doesn't have the really bad beat 'em up mechanic attached to it. You have 6 characters you can play as: the 4 main turtles, Night Watcher, Snatcher and the Shredder once you unlock them. Although it is funny because Shredder wasn't in the TMNT movie, we don't get a 3D render of him on the character select screen. It doesn't make much of a difference because as far as I could tell, there is no difference in how each character plays. You're mostly just choosing aesthetically which character you like most to play as. You lose access to the turtle tag system here, but each level is very short that it wouldn't make sense to have it here. If you enjoyed the core parkour mechanics, honestly, you could actually have some fun with this mode. Another addition to the gameplay here is the use of power-ups you can use a la Mario Kart style. You'll find these as you bounce through the levels, and they do pretty much what you expect them to do as they slow down your opponent in various ways. It's not Mario Kart. Hell, it's not even the surprisingly fun multiplayer from Ghost Rider, which I still recommend giving it a shot if you can. However, on that note, XGP and I found that we had a decent time playing the game. Honestly, it would have been funnier if it was just the beat 'em up mechanics, but because they wisely decided to go with the okay parkour mechanics in the game, it made it somewhat palatable. If out of morbid curiosity you and a friend happen to be a massive Turtles fan, this might be worth checking out, but I'd double check to see if any of the other ports of this game had a better functioning multiplayer. Still, for what it's worth, I did enjoy the multiplayer a bit here. Although, funniest thing to mention is that the game doesn't allow you to choose a stage. Yes, I mentioned before that there are different maps, however the game has a set order in which you play through the maps. So once you start the multiplayer, you'll need to complete the other maps in order to get to the map you want to play, making it impossible to practice or help play your favorite maps with your friends. Truly, for any minor step forward this game takes, it always finds a way to take a step back. Honestly, I don't like being hyperbolic or overly emotional in these kind of situations, but with TMNT, all I can think of is, wow, almost every decision made for this game was just the wrong one. The strange parkour rhythm style gameplay, which again isn't the, and I'm gonna hammer that home, it isn't the worst thing in the world, mind you, despite some grievances and personal preferences, but that has to contend and mesh with the combat, which is some of the flattest combat I've played on the handheld yet, and could even be contender for worst beat 'em up mechanics ever in general for a video game. I'm dead serious on that one. Genuinely, the combat feels like an afterthought where they were told there needs to be combat and it must emulate a combat system instead of the combat actually being thought out. While there are sort of interesting ideas here, none of it in my opinion really works, and it all seems tacked on despite major portions of the game which bog you down, especially when you're getting into the rhythm of some of these stages. I can appreciate they wanted to try and really emphasize the parkour skills of the turtles, but I just feel like there was an easier and better way to do this. Anytime you start to get things in a regular level with the parkour, you have to stop and slog your way through the combat, and it just completely throws off the flow here. In comparison to Scooby-Doo, which to this point is my lowest rated game on the channel as I didn't care for it overall. Partial spoilers for the score here, but I think TMNT does live up to the hype of being considered one of the worst games on the handheld. It's a shame too because I always like to go into these being optimistic and hoping that with time maybe these games are better than people judged them in the past. However, with Scooby-Doo, that still felt like a game. I felt like I was still accomplishing something, and while everything worked there, and it was one of those that the longer I played, the less I liked, TMNT doesn't really feel like a completed game at all. Every feature feels half-baked in some sort of fashion at best, and every idea is either tacked on or only there to give you the illusion of a video game. It's hard to explain, as just watching it doesn't do justice as to how this one really feels, especially in the combat mechanics. In a way, I do kind of recommend trying this game out as it's truly a marvel in and of itself. Almost every idea fails here in some sort of way. Like I mentioned before, even the parkour system that, again, I do think is okay. Maybe I'm overselling it a bit on being good, but even that I still had problems, like for example, where the camera is located. You can be thrown off in such a way where you're gonna mess your chain up only because your camera is faced slightly on a different angle, so you're not gonna know which button to press. It's frustrating for no other reason than it was a choice made by the developers. However, the combat though, and I keep harping on this, but I've never played combat that is so hollow and pointlessly easy that it genuinely shocked me that this even got past any sort of QA. Like, there's almost no fun to be had with it whatsoever. Aside from just laughing at it the first couple times you see the combat. The longer you play the combat system in this game, the worse it gets. And you know, I can see some people enjoying Scooby-Doo Scooby-Doo for what it was, as well as even something like Iron Man, despite me not really caring for them. This game, however, has almost no redeeming quality, and if you're a major fan of the TMNT, this does not feel good enough in the slightest, and I think fans of the Turtles and the TMNT movie specifically definitely don't deserve this as their movie tie-in video game. I remember when Platinum's Ninja Turtles game came out and it got slammed, but I actually think it's kind of a hidden gem nowadays. Although I will say I think the in-game turtle designs should have been the same as the box art version, but I digress. My point is, going into this, I was hoping that it would be similar to that game where people just got it wrong or it turned out to be a hidden gem of sorts. No, it's not, unfortunately. Truly, in terms of gameplay, the only real saving grace here that you can argue is worth playing would be the multiplayer. But even then, though, the multiplayer has its own issues, of course, because it's based off the parkour system, and while the parkour system is okay, there are issues there, like I've said ad nauseum at this point. But at tops, there's 4 extremely quick levels to go through. The mode itself doesn't beg to be played, though. In reality, it almost felt like the higher-ups at Ubisoft kind of like a check system down for the developers and told them to quote-unquote accomplish a task, and they essentially just went through and checked a box that was handed down to them from upper management. It's disappointing, to say the least, because a lot more time and care, and you might have been able to get something out of this whole experience. The lowest I saw this for a physical on eBay was $10, but that wasn't including shipping. On average, the game is going for about 16 total, which I think is too high in my opinion. Still, if you're a huge TMNT fan and have a friend who would be willing to play the multiplayer with you, it might be worth grabbing it at this price, albeit I would see if I could get it for less than $10, but still, the movie is way less expensive to own physically, and I'd recommend just picking that up. I even managed to beat the game in one sitting, so just for the fun of it, I looked and the movie itself has a runtime of an hour and 27 minutes. The game, including credits, took me roughly 2 hours and 10 minutes to complete, about 43 minutes longer than the film itself, and honestly, I would just say watch the movie instead of playing this one. Unless you're really into rhythm style games, I can see you finding some enjoyment there on like the multiplayer side and a little bit on the single player side. However, you're gonna have to contend with the awful beat 'em up mechanics at some point when you play through the main story mode. You're better off just buying the movie and watching it with your friend, as opposed to spending almost $32 to get copies for each of you guys, if you guys are trying to play these games on physical handhelds. On Metacritic, TMNT received a 37 critically and a 4.6 user score-wise. For me, Scooby-Doo has been replaced, and I think its infamy as being one of the worst games on PSP is mostly justified here, as personally, I'd give it like a 2.4. So rounding down, it's a 2. So I guess keeping the Mickeys on standby was a good idea. This is going to be a hard one to beat in the race for the bottom, if I'm completely honest. I didn't really bring this up during the review, but I did like the music for the most part, even though it's not going to go on my workout shuffle or anything, but it works. And overall, I do like the way that the movie that this is based off of looks, and despite the graphics being subpar, they at least look like the movie it's based off of. Again, after I slept on it a bit, I did sort of start to come around to the parkour rhythm-based system, and I can appreciate the fact that they tried to emulate the parkour moves from the movie. Now again, this is just my opinion, but I don't feel like that should have been the core game, as ultimately it just comes down to you pressing one of the 4 face buttons timed correctly. But even then, like I mentioned before, based on how you're facing, it's not always the correct way, and you'll undoubtedly break your chain on a first playthrough in almost any of these levels. The game completely relies on multiple playthroughs to get the most out of the parkour element, and with that being said, it in turn relies on a lot of memorization, which I guess on the surface isn't a terrible thing, but what compounds this and ultimately ruins the game is even if you're trying to enjoy the parkour segments, you're still going to run into the beat 'em up mechanic that just sucks any fun you could have right out of the game, which just makes me kind of think, why didn't they just make this a platforming game instead of a pseudo rhythm game with a tacked on beat 'em up mechanic, or focus on one over the other, turning this into a rhythm game, or one of the interactive movie games like Heavy Rain or even Indigo Prophecy. It's different and definitely would have been seen as an oddity of sorts, but those types of games were starting to come out at the time, and we're finding an audience as sort of pseudo successors to point and click adventure games. I know we hadn't quite gotten to the Telltale style games yet when this came out, but that could have, and even to this day would be something worth checking out, since there isn't a Telltale-style TMNT game out there to the best of my knowledge. Other than that, truly, if you're a fan of the Ninja Turtles, almost any other video game of the Turtles out there is better than this. Save your money and go pick up the Cowabunga collection, or get some friends together and give Platinum's Ninja Turtles, Mutants in Manhattan another go, because it's way better than this. The game itself is about $35 on eBay right now, which I do think is a little pricey, but it being delisted from online marketplaces makes the game a bit rarer. What do you think though? Do you think there are more redeeming qualities here in TMNT than I saw? Is the parkour system and multiplayer enough to give this higher marks? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you for stopping by.